Story 1. Working as a nurse in a mental health facility can be very challenging. I've always been calm and collected, but one night something happened that shook me to my core. It was a night I will never forget. It was a quiet Thursday evening. The sun had set, and the moonlight was casting long shadows on the walls. I was on the night shift at St. Anne's mental health facility, a place that had seen many troubled souls over the years. Some of the patients were quiet while others could be violent. The building itself was old, with creaky floors and narrow hallways. My shift started at 8 p.m. The air was cool, and the night felt normal. I did my rounds, checking on the patients and making sure they were comfortable and had taken their medication. Everything seemed fine, but there was a strange feeling in the air, like something was watching me. At around midnight, I was in the nurse's station, updating patient records. The dim light from the lamp on my desk was the only light in the room. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper. I paused, listening carefully. It was so soft that I thought I might have imagined it. Shrugging it off, I continued my work. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was clearer. It sounded like someone was calling my name. Emily. Emily. My heart started to race. I stood up and looked around, but there was no one there. The hallway outside the station was empty. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I decided to do another round to check on the patients. As I walked through the dark hallways, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I reached the end of the hall where room 309 was. The patient in that room, Mr. Whitaker, was known for his quiet demeanor. He rarely spoke and spent most of his time staring at the ceiling. As I approached his room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Mr. Whitaker was lying in his usual spot, but something was different. He was humming a strange tune, something I had never heard before. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling, and he didn't seem to notice I was there. Mr. Whitaker, I called softly. He didn't respond. I walked closer and gently touched his shoulder. He stopped humming and turned to look at me. His eyes were wide and he whispered, "They're here." "Who's here, Mr. Whitaker?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "The shadows," he said, his voice trembling. "They come at night. They whisper. They want to take me." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't know what to say. I tried to comfort him, but he kept repeating the same words. The shadows. The shadows. I left his room feeling uneasy. As I walked back to the nurse's station, the lights flickered. The whispering started again, louder this time. "Emily. Emily." It echoed through the hallway. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the nurse's station, the lights went out completely. I was plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but it didn't make me feel any safer. The whispering grew louder, and now I could hear multiple voices. "Emily, come play with us. Join us." I felt a cold breeze brush past me, and the papers on my desk fluttered to the floor. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move at the edge of the light. My hands were shaking as I tried to steady the flashlight. I decided to check the security cameras to see if there was anyone else in the building. The monitors were in a small room next to the nurse's station. I rushed in and turned on the screens. Most of the cameras showed empty hallways and rooms, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the camera view of the hallway outside room 309, shadows were moving. They didn't have a clear shape, they were just dark, shifting forms. And they were moving towards the nurse's station, towards me. I couldn't breathe. I watched in horror as the shadows got closer and closer. I grabbed the phone to call for help, but the line was dead. The whispering was all around me now, louder than ever. "Emily, join us. Forever." I backed into the corner of the room, my flashlight clutched tightly in my hand. The shadows reached the door, and I felt an icy chill wash over me. The door creaked open, and the room grew even darker. The whispers were deafening. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and the shadows vanished. The whispering stopped. I was left standing in the bright light, trembling and gasping for air. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure: this was no ordinary place. There was something evil here, something that fed on the fear of the patients and the staff. The rest of the night was a blur. I somehow managed to finish my shift, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. When morning finally came, I handed over to the day nurse and left the facility as quickly as I could. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Who would believe me? That night changed everything. I realized that some things cannot be explained, and there are forces in this world beyond our understanding. I never worked another night shift at St. Anne's. The memory of that night still haunts me, and sometimes in the quiet of the night I can still hear the whispering. Story 2. Working the night shift as a security guard in an old hospital can be unnerving, but I'd always prided myself on my ability to stay calm under pressure. That all changed one fateful night. It was around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the hospital was eerily quiet. The only sounds were the occasional beeping of machines and the distant hum of the HVAC system. My rounds took me through the dimly lit hallways, ensuring that everything was secure. As I approached the elevator, I noticed something strange. The elevator doors were slightly ajar, and the lights inside flickered erratically. I stepped closer, trying to peer inside. The elevator seemed empty, but there was a chill in the air that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I pressed the button to close the doors, but they didn't respond. Frustrated, I decided to use the stairs to continue my rounds. As I turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper. It was so soft that I could barely make out the words, but it sounded like someone was calling my name. John. John. I froze in my tracks and turned back to the elevator. The whispering grew louder, and I could now hear multiple voices. John, come with us. Join us. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, and the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. I stepped closer to the elevator, shining my flashlight inside. There was no one there, but the whispering continued, echoing in the confined space. Suddenly, the elevator doors slammed shut with a loud clang. I jumped back, my flashlight flickering. I tried to steady my breathing, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I decided to head to the security office to check the surveillance cameras. As I walked through the hallways, the whispering followed me. It seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at once. I quickened my pace, desperately wanting to reach the safety of the security office. When I finally arrived, I locked the door behind me and turned on the monitors. I scanned the camera feeds, hoping to find some rational explanation for what was happening. Most of the cameras showed empty hallways and patient rooms, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the camera feed for the elevator, I saw dark, shadowy figures moving inside. They didn't have clear shapes, but they seemed to be swirling and shifting, almost like they were made of smoke. The whispering grew louder through the speakers, and I could feel the cold presence of the shadows closing in. My hands were shaking as I reached for the phone to call for help, but the line was dead. Panic set in as I realized I was alone, trapped in this haunted place with no way to escape. The shadows on the screen seemed to notice me watching them. They moved towards the camera, and I could see their faces twisted, grotesque visages with hollow, empty eyes. They pressed their faces against the lens, and the whispering reached a deafening crescendo. John, join us. Forever. I backed away from the monitors, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get out of there. I grabbed my flashlight and bolted for the door. As I ran through the hallways, the whispering followed me, growing fainter as I put more distance between myself and the elevator. I finally burst through the exit doors and into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I was safely in my car, parked in the lot outside. I sat there, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I knew I couldn't go back in there. Whatever those shadows were, they were something beyond my understanding. I never returned to that hospital. I handed in my resignation the next day and moved on to a different job, but the memory of that night still haunts me. Sometimes in the dead of night I can still hear the whispering, and I wonder if those shadows are still there, waiting for their next victim. Story 3. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, so when I got a job as a night manager at an old hotel with a haunted reputation, I was more excited than scared. Little did I know, I was about to have an experience that would change my life forever. The hotel, built in the early 1900s, had seen its fair share of strange occurrences. Guests often reported seeing apparitions and hearing unexplained noises. The most infamous story involved room 213, where a young woman named Clara had supposedly taken her own life in front of the room's antique mirror. One night around 3 a.m., I was doing my rounds. The hallways were dimly lit, and the hotel was eerily quiet. As I approached room 213, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. The air was thick with an unsettling energy. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to go inside. The room was exactly as I had seen it during the day, old-fashioned furniture, a large 4-poster bed, and the infamous mirror hanging on the wall. I approached the mirror, curious and apprehensive. As I stood in front of it, I felt a strange pull, almost as if the mirror was drawing me in. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror changed. Instead of seeing my own face, I saw the pale, sorrowful face of a young woman. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she mouthed the words, "Help me." I stumbled back, my heart racing. The image disappeared, and my own reflection returned. I tried to calm myself, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard a faint sobbing coming from behind me. I turned around, but the room was empty. The sobbing grew louder, and I could feel a cold breeze brush past me. "Clara," I whispered, my voice trembling. The sobbing stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then, the mirror shattered with a deafening crash. Shards of glass flew across the room, and I shielded my face with my arms. When I looked up, I saw Clara standing in the middle of the room, her figure translucent and ethereal. "Help me," she repeated, her voice echoing in the empty room. I wanted to run, but I was frozen in place. Clara pointed to the corner of the room, where a dark shadow was forming. The shadow grew larger, taking on a menacing shape. It loomed over Clara, and she looked at me with pleading eyes. "Help me, please." Gathering all my courage, I stepped forward. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The shadow hissed, and the room grew even colder. Clara pointed to the nightstand, where an old, dusty book lay. I picked it up and opened it, finding pages filled with strange symbols and incantations. As I read aloud from the book, the shadow shrieked and began to dissipate. Clara's figure grew brighter, and she smiled at me. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with relief. The shadow vanished completely, and Clara's spirit began to fade. "Wait," I called out. "What happened to you?" Clara looked at me one last time. "I was trapped. But now I'm free. Thank you." With that, she disappeared, leaving me alone in the room. The temperature returned to normal, and the sense of dread lifted. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The next morning, I reported the incident to the hotel owner, who wasn't surprised. He told me that Clara's spirit had been restless for years, and I had somehow managed to help her find peace. The mirror was replaced, and room 213 was no longer considered haunted. But I never forgot that night. I still work at the hotel, and every now and then I feel a cold breeze and hear a faint sobbing. I like to think it's Clara, watching over the place that was once her prison, now finally at peace.